Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
There's a certain unease that comes with night shifts. Something about the solitude, the silence, and the darkness seems to amplify the smallest noises, turning them into something sinister. But nothing could prepare Jim for the terror he'd experience while working his late-night shift at the gas station. The night had started like any other. Jim was used to the lonely hours, the quiet buzz of fluorescent lights, and the occasional customer who'd stop by for a snack or fuel. It was 2:47 a.m. when the first strange thing happened. The door chime rang, signaling someone entering, but when Jim glanced up from his magazine, the person wasn't there. Confused, Jim checked the security monitors. The screen was empty. He figured it must have been a glitch, though it did feel unsettling. A strange feeling crept up his spine, but he brushed it off as just the effect of working alone in the dead of night. He continued his shift. An hour passed before he saw it again. This time the door chime rang, and when Jim looked up, he saw a figure standing in the entrance. It wasn't someone he recognized. A tall man, draped in a long coat, face obscured by a dark hood. The strange thing, the man wasn't moving. He just stood there, staring into the dimly lit interior of the store. Jim's heart pounded in his chest. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice shaky. The man didn't respond. He simply stood motionless, as if frozen. Jim's mind raced. Should he approach? Should he call the police? Something felt off about this. The man was unnervingly still, as if he wasn't part of the world around him. After what felt like an eternity, the man finally moved, but he didn't walk toward the counter. Instead, he turned abruptly, walking out of the store without a sound. Jim stood frozen, unsure if he should follow or just lock the door. He chose the latter, bolting it and staying behind the counter, his hands trembling as he watched the security cameras. The man was gone, but that didn't bring Jim any comfort. The feeling of dread had only deepened, a presence lingering in the store that wasn't there before. The hours seemed to stretch on longer than usual, the night heavier, and that's when it happened. The power flickered, the lights blinked out, leaving Jim in complete darkness. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator in the back of the store. Jim's breath came in shallow gasps as he reached for his flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness. But before he could turn it on, a loud bang echoed through the building, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming closer. His heart slammed against his chest. He turned the flashlight on and swung it toward the sound, but there was nothing there. No one. Then a low voice, barely a whisper, reached his ears. "I'm still here." Jim froze, the blood draining from his face. His mind raced. That voice? It wasn't the man from before. It sounded wrong, like it was coming from everywhere at once. Panicked, Jim grabbed his phone, ready to call for help, but his screen was frozen, and he couldn't get through to anyone. The footsteps grew louder, closer. The store seemed to close in around him. Suddenly, the door chime rang again. This time, it was different. The door opened, but Jim didn't hear it. The chime was the only sound that broke the silence. And as he turned to face the entrance, the same man from earlier stood there, only now his face was visible. But it wasn't a face at all. It was a smooth, featureless mask, pale and lifeless. His eyes were two black holes, voids that sucked in the light around them. Jim wanted to scream, to run, but his body refused to move. The man stepped forward, and the door slammed shut behind him, trapping them both inside. The temperature in the store dropped suddenly, and the air felt thick with something malevolent. The man's head tilted to the side, his hollow eyes locked on Jim as if studying him. Then, with a voice that felt like ice scraping against his soul, the man spoke again. "You've been waiting for me, haven't you?" Jim couldn't respond. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The man stepped closer, his long, unnaturally still fingers stretching out toward Jim. The light flickered again, and just as the man's fingers brushed against his skin, everything went black. When Jim woke, it was daylight. He found himself on the cold tile floor behind the counter, his body stiff and aching. His phone was beside him, the screen cracked. His eyes darted around the store. It was empty. No sign of the man, no sign of anything out of place. Shaken, Jim stood up and checked the security cameras. The footage from that night was gone. Everything from the moment the man had entered the store had vanished. He had no proof of what had happened, but he knew. Jim knew that the man had never really left. And no matter how many shifts he worked at that gas station, the man would always be there, watching, waiting. And so Jim's nights became longer. The shadows felt heavier and the air colder. Each shift brought the same dread, the same cold presence that never quite left.
Story number 2.
It was supposed to be an ordinary night shift at the old warehouse. Sarah had worked here for months, alone in the dark, with only the hum of the machines to keep her company. There were rumors about the place, that it was haunted, that strange things happened after dark, but Sarah never paid much attention. She was practical, used to the quiet, but tonight felt different. It had started with the lights flickering in the storage room, and that was strange, but not unusual. The power had been unstable ever since the place had changed ownership a few years ago. But as Sarah walked toward the storage room to check the breakers, something made her hesitate. The air was heavier, colder. There was a faint sound, like someone whispering her name. Sarah, she froze, her heart pounding. No one should be here. She was the only person working tonight. Who's there? She called out, her voice trembling more than she wanted to admit. Nothing. The sound had stopped. Sarah tried to shake it off. She wasn't some scared kid. She needed to focus on her work. But as she turned to leave, a loud bang echoed from somewhere deep within the warehouse, the kind of sound that made your skin crawl. It wasn't the sound of a machine malfunction. It was something alive. Her pulse quickened as she moved toward the noise. The deeper into the warehouse she went, the more oppressive the air became. The silence between the echoes felt thick and suffocating, like someone was following her every step, but she couldn't see anything. She reached the corner where the sound had come from. Nothing, just rows of crates, sitting still in the shadows. She was about to turn around when she saw it, a shadow moving at the far end of the warehouse, quick and fluid. "Who's there?" she demanded, but her voice cracked. No answer. It moved again. This time, Sarah could feel its presence, a cold, creeping sensation at the back of her neck. She couldn't explain it, but something was wrong. The warehouse was too silent, too still. Everything about this felt unnatural. She turned to leave, but the whispering returned, louder now, right behind her. "Sarah!" Her breath caught in her throat, and she spun around, shining her flashlight into the darkness. The beam bounced off empty shelves, nothing there. But then she heard it. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps, getting closer. The air was thick with dread now, so thick it felt like the walls were closing in on her. The footsteps stopped. She tried to move, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The flashlight in her hand flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The footsteps started again, this time closer, like someone was standing right behind her. She dared not turn around. Then a voice, a cold, guttural voice, close to her ear. "Leave, or it will take you." The flashlight died. Darkness enveloped her in an instant. She fumbled to find her phone, but it was useless. No signal. Panic surged in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The footsteps were back. They were in front of her now. And then she felt it. Something cold and wet brushed against her arm, like a hand, but it was wrong, too slick, too heavy. She whipped around, but there was nothing there. The air was suffocating, the silence oppressive. Every instinct in her screamed to run, but she couldn't find the strength. The weight of the darkness around her was too much, the pressure building. And then she heard it again, the whispering, now like dozens of voices, all saying her name in unison. Sarah. The lights flickered back on, but everything had changed. The warehouse was still empty, but it felt wrong, the air distorted, heavy with something she couldn't see but could feel pressing down on her. And in the distance, standing motionless in the shadows, the figure. It had no face, just a silhouette in the darkness, its presence suffocating. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were empty voids. It didn't move, but Sarah could feel it watching her, waiting. She bolted. Running was all she could do. Her heart was racing, her mind a blur of fear. She didn't care what she knocked over, what she broke. She just needed to get out. But as she reached the door, it slammed shut in front of her, locking her in. The whispering stopped. Silence. She spun around, looking for any way to escape. And then she saw it. The figure was standing behind her, closer now, right next to her ear, its breath cold against her skin. "Too late," it whispered. Her scream was swallowed by the empty warehouse, and the lights flickered once more.
Story number 3.
It was a small town, tucked away from the hustle and bustle of city life, where everyone knew each other's business. Emily had just moved to the area, eager to start fresh and leave behind the chaos of her old life. The house she rented was old, weathered, and a bit rundown, but it was cheap, and she didn't mind. There was something nostalgic about it, like stepping into a different time. Her first night there was quiet, too quiet. The wind howled through the trees outside, and the house creaked and groaned as if it were alive. Emily shrugged it off as nothing more than the sounds of an old house settling. After all, she was used to it. But on the second night, things took a strange turn. She was sitting on the couch, watching TV, when she heard it, a soft tapping. At first, she thought it was the wind against the window, but the tapping was rhythmic, almost deliberate. It came from upstairs. Her heart skipped a beat. No one else lived in the house. The upstairs was empty. She stood up cautiously, her feet dragging against the wooden floor as she made her way toward the stairs. The tapping grew louder the closer she got. "Hello?" she called out, her voice wavering. Nothing. She turned on the light and slowly ascended the stairs, her hand gripping the railing tightly. The tapping stopped the moment she reached the top of the staircase. The hallway was dark, the air thick with an unsettling silence. She glanced down the corridor toward the 2 bedrooms and the bathroom, but nothing seemed out of place. She checked the first bedroom. Empty. The second bedroom. Empty. She hesitated, but then moved to the bathroom. As she pushed the door open, the air in the room grew inexplicably cold. She flicked the light switch, but the bulb didn't turn on. The room was pitch black, and that's when she saw it. A shadow. A figure. It was standing in the corner of the bathroom, completely still, as though waiting for her to notice. Emily's breath hitched in her throat, and her body froze. The figure was tall, but its features were indistinguishable, as if it was made of darkness itself. "Who are you?" she asked, barely able to choke the words out. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, unmoving, the coldness in the air thickening with every passing second. Emily stumbled backward, her mind racing. She wanted to run, to leave, but her feet wouldn't obey. The figure took a step toward her, its movements unnaturally slow, deliberate. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She backed away, but her foot caught on the rug, and she fell to the floor with a loud thud. The figure was close now, just inches from her face, its presence overwhelming. Emily reached out, her hand brushing the cold wall behind her, and that's when she noticed something strange. There were faint scratches on the bathroom wall, almost like someone had clawed at the paint. And then she realized those scratches weren't random. They formed words. "Get out!" The figure's shadowy form flickered, like it was losing shape. The words seemed to echo in her head, growing louder, desperate. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" Emily scrambled to her feet, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She didn't care what was happening anymore. All she knew was she had to leave. She bolted down the stairs, out the door, and into the cold night air. But as she stood there, gasping for breath in the front yard, she realized something terrifying. The tapping sound was still there, but now it was coming from inside the house. And the last thing Emily heard before she ran as far as her legs could take her was the sound of the figure's voice, a low, raspy whisper coming from the darkness of the open door. Too late. She never returned to the house. No one ever saw her again. Some say the house is still there, sitting empty and waiting, but every now and then the tapping can be heard from the street outside.
Story number 4.
The sun had just set when Jamie pulled up to the old motel. The neon sign flickered erratically, casting a dim, sickly glow over the parking lot. He'd been driving for hours, his eyes heavy, and when he saw the motel from the road, he knew he needed a place to rest for the night. There wasn't a soul in sight when he walked up to the office. The door creaked as it swung open, and a man behind the counter looked up, his eyes sunken, his face pale. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Checking in?" Jamie nodded, eager to get to his room. He paid for a night's stay and was handed a key, the metal worn down with years of use. The man didn't say much else, just motioned toward the hallway. The room was small and smelled of musty carpet and stale air, but Jamie was too tired to care. He locked the door behind him and dropped his bag onto the bed. The walls seemed thinner than usual, the silence almost oppressive. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, but Jamie soon found himself drifting off to sleep. It was the sound that woke him, a soft tapping, almost like fingernails against wood. He opened his eyes, disoriented, and glanced around. The tapping came again, this time louder, as if someone was standing out his door, knocking repeatedly. He sat up, confused. There was no one else in the motel, or at least that's what he thought. The hallway had been empty when he checked in. Jamie hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. He stood up, his legs still heavy with sleep, and walked to the door. As his hand touched the doorknob, the tapping stopped. "Hello?" he called out, his voice breaking the silence. No answer. He opened the door, just a crack, but no one was there. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the neon sign outside. A chill ran down his spine, and for a moment he considered going back to bed. But then he heard it, a whisper. It came from further down the hall, soft and almost indistinguishable. "Help me." Jamie's heart pounded in his chest. It was a woman's voice, strained and weak. He stepped out of his room, his bare feet pressing against the cold tile floor. He moved cautiously, drawn to the source of the voice. It was coming from the last room at the end of the hallway. As he neared, the door to the room creaked open on its own. The faintest sliver of light escaped from the crack. Jamie's curiosity overpowered his fear. He pushed the door open further, stepping into the room. It was empty. The room was perfectly still, no sign of anyone being there. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn. But on the wall across from him, written in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "Don't look behind you." Before Jamie could process what he was seeing, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang. His breath caught in his throat, panic surging through him as he spun around. But there was nothing there, nothing but darkness. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. He could see his breath in front of him, a thin mist in the air. The whispering came again, this time closer. "Help me." Jamie's blood ran cold as he slowly turned his head. His eyes locked onto something in the corner of the room where the shadows seemed unnaturally thick. A woman. Pale, gaunt, her eyes wide and unblinking, standing perfectly still in the darkness. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. Jamie's body went stiff with fear as the woman began to move, slowly, almost gliding toward him. Her hands reached out, fingers elongating unnaturally like claws. "No!" Jamie screamed, backing away, his mind racing for an escape. But the door wouldn't open. The handle turned in his grasp, but it wouldn't budge. The woman was closer now, her face contorted into something grotesque, her mouth stretching unnaturally wide. As she reached out toward him, her hand grazing his arm, Jamie felt a coldness that burned, as if her touch was freezing his very soul. In a moment of sheer panic, Jamie shoved his shoulder against the door, slamming it open with a loud crash. He didn't look back. He ran, his heart racing, his breath ragged as he bolted down the hallway and out the front door. The night air was freezing against his skin, but he didn't stop. He didn't even know where he was going. All he could think about was getting as far away from that motel as possible. The next morning, when he returned to the front desk to check out, the man behind the counter didn't acknowledge him at first. When he finally looked up, there was a strange, knowing look in his eyes. "You saw her, didn't you?" the man asked softly. Jamie's voice shook as he replied, Who was she?" The man's face grew darker. She was the last guest who stayed in that room. They found her body in the motel last year, but they never found out who did it. Ever since, no one who stays in that room ever leaves the same. Jamie turned and fled the motel without another word, and as he drove away, the rearview mirror revealed something that made his stomach drop. A shadow, standing by the side of the road, watching him leave. It wasn't until he got home that he realized he hadn't closed the motel room door behind him.
Story number 5.
It was nearing midnight when Mark decided to take the old country road to get home. The highway was usually a quicker route, but tonight he opted for the winding back roads that cut through thick woods. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a faint glow over the asphalt, and the silence of the night pressed against him like a heavy weight. He didn't mind it. He liked the peace and the isolation, but tonight felt different. There was an unease in the air, something just beneath the surface that he couldn't quite place. He turned off the main road and onto the narrow path that led deeper into the woods. His headlights bounced off the trees, their long, twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Mark gripped the wheel tighter. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled, but he brushed it off as nothing more than nerves. As he drove further down the road, he noticed something strange, a figure standing at the edge of the trees. At first, he thought it might be an animal or a trick of the light, but as he got closer, he realized it was a person, a woman. She was standing motionless, her back to him, her long hair flowing in the wind. Mark slowed down, unsure of whether to stop or keep driving. He was in the middle of nowhere, and the woman's presence seemed out of place, almost otherworldly. He rolled his window down, the cold air rushing in. "Hey, are you okay?" he called out. The woman didn't respond. She didn't even move. Mark felt a twinge of discomfort crawl up his spine, but curiosity got the better of him. He stopped the car and stepped out, walking toward her. "Hey," he said louder this time, his voice tinged with concern. "Do you need help?" Still, no response. The wind picked up, and for a split second, Mark thought he saw her head slowly turn, just enough to show him the pale side of her face. Her skin was unnaturally white, almost sickly. He froze. Her eyes were wide open, black as coal, staring into the distance. There was no emotion in them, just endless, empty darkness. Mark felt his stomach drop. He took a step back, his instincts screaming for him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. And then, in a voice that sent chills down his spine, she spoke. "Don't go any further." Mark's blood ran cold. Something about her tone, low and slow like a warning, sent a shockwave through him. He turned around, his mind racing, but he didn't know why. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something terrible was waiting for him just ahead. Before he could react, the woman moved. She didn't walk. She glided, her feet never touching the ground. The moment she reached the edge of the road, the trees around her seemed to shift, bending as if they were alive, pulling her in. Mark's heart pounded in his chest and panic surged through him. He turned and ran back to the car, jumping into the driver's seat and slamming the door shut. His hands trembled as he started the engine. His foot slammed down on the gas and the car sped off, the tires squealing against the asphalt. But as he drove, he couldn't shake the image of her face from his mind, the empty, lifeless eyes that seemed to follow him. The road was long and the trees thick, but he pushed on, desperate to leave the woods behind. The further he drove, the more the feeling of dread grew, pressing on him like a weight in his chest. The headlights seemed to dim, and the night seemed darker, more oppressive. He couldn't explain it, but it felt like the road was stretching, like it was never going to end. And then, as he rounded a curve, he saw it. There, in the middle of the road, standing under a street lamp, was the woman. Her back was turned to him, just like before, her long hair flowing in the wind. Mark's heart skipped a beat. How was she here? He slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. He stared at her in disbelief. There was no way she could have gotten here before him. He had been driving at least 15 minutes, maybe more. The woman slowly turned her head, her eyes locking onto his. She didn't move, not even a step, but her presence was suffocating. "Why are you following me?" Mark shouted through the windshield, his voice shaky. "What do you want?" She tilted her head, and in that eerie, whispering voice she answered, "You should have listened." Without warning, she was gone, vanished, as if she had never been there. Mark blinked, his heart racing. There was nothing in front of him but the empty road, the street lamp flickering faintly. He drove on, terrified and confused, but the unease never left him. The image of the woman stayed with him, burning in his mind, and no matter how many times he tried to shake it off, he couldn't. The next morning, Mark's car was found abandoned on the side of the road. The doors were wide open, but there was no sign of struggle, no blood, no evidence of anything amiss, except for the words that had been scratched into the dirt on the hood of his car. "Don't go any further." Mark was never found. The locals say the road is cursed, that anyone who dares to drive down it is never the same when they come back. Some say the woman is still out there, waiting for the next person to come along, to warn them, or maybe to take them. No one really knows, but the woods are never quiet anymore. The wind always carries a whisper, and it's said you can hear it if you listen close enough. Don't go any further.
Story number 6.
The old farmhouse had been abandoned for years, but when Liam and his friends decided to explore it one chilly evening, they didn't think twice. The house was a bit of a legend in their town, rumored to be haunted by the family that once lived there. The windows were boarded up, the door creaked with every gust of wind, but Liam was always the one to push the group forward. It was late afternoon when they arrived, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows over the field. As they approached the front porch, Liam couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The air seemed heavier here, thicker. His friends, Ben, Ava, and Sophie, joked nervously as they made their way up the steps. Liam didn't laugh. His instinct told him that something was wrong, but he couldn't explain why. He pushed the door open, the rusty hinges protesting loudly. Inside, it was as though time had frozen. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of mildew and decay was overpowering. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and old furniture was strewn about, forgotten and rotting. It was dark, save for the small slivers of light that made their way through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. "Let's just take a look around," Liam said, trying to sound confident, but his voice wavered. He had to admit he felt uncomfortable. The place felt wrong. They split up, each taking a different section of the house. Liam walked through the hallway, his flashlight scanning the rooms. Nothing seemed out of place, just old furniture, faded photographs on the walls, and broken picture frames. But the further he went, the more the air grew colder. It wasn't just the chill from the broken windows, it was something more. He paused in front of an old door, its paint chipped and cracked. A low hum seemed to come from behind it, like a faint buzzing. He couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else, but it made his skin crawl. Ignoring his growing discomfort, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room inside was small, with a single window that let in little light. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, and old toys were scattered around, as though a child had once lived there. But in the center of the room, there was something strange, a large, old-fashioned mirror. Liam's heart skipped a beat. The mirror looked out of place. It wasn't dusty like the rest of the room. It was clean, almost too clean. As he stepped closer, he noticed the reflection wasn't right. The room in the mirror was different, newer, with bright walls and fresh furniture. The reflection of the bed was neatly made, and the toys that littered the floor were arranged in perfect rows. Liam's breath caught in his throat. What was going on? He leaned in closer, his face just inches from the mirror. That's when he saw her, standing in the corner of the reflection, just out of the frame. A little girl. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress, her hair long and dark, but her face was obscured by a shadow. Liam's pulse raced. His fingers trembled as they hovered near the glass. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Suddenly, the reflection of the little girl moved. She tilted her head and slowly smiled, a wide, unnaturally wide smile. It was chilling. Her eyes, dark and empty, locked onto Liam's reflection. Liam stumbled back, his breath caught in his chest. He turned to run, but as he did, the room in the mirror changed. The bed was no longer neat. The toys were scattered across the floor. The little girl was no longer in the corner. She was standing right in front of the mirror, staring directly at him. He froze. A cold, suffocating presence filled the room. It was like the house itself had become alive, watching him, waiting. The hum from before grew louder, almost deafening, as though the very walls were vibrating with it. The reflection of the girl moved again, her face now inches from the mirror, her smile wide and grotesque. Liam's heart raced, panic setting in. He had to get out. But the door was no longer there. The room had changed, shifting around him. The walls seemed to bend, closing in, and the air grew heavier. He tried to back away, but the room felt smaller with every step, as though it were swallowing him whole. His breath came in ragged gasps. The mirror was pulling him in, its surface rippling like water. The girl's face pressed against the glass, her smile widening further, stretching unnaturally. Her voice soft and sweet. "Stay with me." Liam screamed. He turned and bolted for the door, but it was too late. The walls of the room had closed in completely, and he was trapped. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him was the mirror, now a window into a twisted, distorted version of the room, where the little girl's eyes were no longer empty. They were staring at him. And in her eyes, he saw something else, his own reflection. The next morning, when the others found the room, it was empty. No sign of Liam. The mirror, though, was still there, clean and unmarked. The toys were still scattered across the floor. The bed was still perfectly made, but there was no trace of the boy who had entered that room. As they stood there, staring at the mirror, a cold breeze passed through the room, carrying with it the faintest whisper, "Stay with me." Some say the house still stands, abandoned and decaying, but the mirror, oh, the mirror has changed. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to look into it, you might see a little girl staring back at you. And if you look too long, you might find yourself trapped, just like Liam.
Story number 7.
Late one evening, Michael and his friends were driving back from a weekend camping trip in the woods, their minds still buzzing from the fresh air and the adventure. The road they took was a long, deserted stretch, weaving through dense trees with no other cars in sight. They had been on this road countless times, but tonight felt different. The air was thick, and the trees seemed to crowd in on them, making the road feel smaller, narrower. "Anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Jake asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the group. Michael glanced at him, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in his stomach. "You're just tired, man. You've been listening to too many horror podcasts." He forced a chuckle, but the words felt hollow. There was something unsettling about the dark stretch of road they were on. The trees seemed to whisper in the wind, and the moonlight barely pierced through the thick branches above. As they continued down the road, a flicker of movement in the distance caught Michael's eye. It was too quick for him to catch it clearly, but it was definitely something. Someone. He rubbed his eyes and tried to focus, but there was nothing. "Did you see that?" Michael asked, his voice a little more urgent now. "What?" Jake responded, his tone dismissive. "A figure in the trees." Michael turned to look out the passenger side window, but there was nothing now, just the dark stretch of road and the thick woods beyond it. He let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding and shrugged it off. "Let's just get home," Michael said, trying to push the unsettling feeling to the back of his mind. But the further they drove, the stronger the feeling grew. Michael kept seeing flashes of movement in the trees, like someone was darting in and out of the shadows just beyond the reach of the headlights. His heart began to pound faster, and he wasn't sure if it was the adrenaline from the woods or something else entirely. Then the car's headlights flickered. The engine sputtered once, twice, and then went silent. Michael cursed under his breath as the car coasted to a stop on the side of the road. "What the hell?" Jake said, his voice laced with disbelief. "It was fine just a minute ago." Michael tried to restart the car, but the engine didn't even attempt to turn over. They were stuck in the middle of nowhere with no cell service and no sign of civilization. The woods around them were eerily quiet now, a sharp contrast to the wind that had been howling through the trees moments earlier. The silence felt oppressive, as though something was lurking, waiting. The kind of silence that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. "All right, let's just walk to the nearest gas station or something," Jake suggested, clearly trying to stay calm, but his eyes darted nervously around the dark woods. "I don't think that's a good idea," Michael replied, his voice strained. "We'll wait here. Someone will pass by soon." But no one came. The road was as empty as ever, the dark trees pressing in on them from all sides. As they sat there in the silence, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air felt colder, and he noticed something strange, something that hadn't been there before. There was a figure standing in the woods, just beyond the trees, its outline barely visible in the darkness. At first, Michael thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But then the figure moved. It was slow, deliberate, like it was trying to remain hidden in the shadows, but the longer Michael looked, the clearer it became. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man, but something was wrong. His body was unnaturally still, his movements jerky, like a puppet on strings. He stood there, unmoving, staring directly at the car. "Guys," Michael whispered, panic rising in his throat. "There's someone out there." Jake turned to look, but the figure was gone. Just like that, swallowed up by the darkness of the trees. "Are you messing with us, man?" Ben asked, his voice shaking slightly. There's nothing there, but Michael knew what he had seen. His heart raced as he locked the car doors and turned back to the steering wheel, trying to restart the engine again, but it wouldn't budge. The figure wasn't gone. It was still there, lurking just out of sight. The air grew colder still. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches creaking in the wind like they were whispering to one another. Michael's fingers gripped the wheel tighter. He couldn't look away from the woods. And then he saw it again. The figure was closer now. Its movements were more fluid, less jerky. It was walking toward them, slowly, dragging one foot behind the other, as if it were struggling to move. "Who the hell is that?" Ben hissed, his face pale. "I don't know," Michael said, barely above a whisper, but he could feel the sweat dripping down his back. The figure stopped just outside the reach of the headlights, standing perfectly still. Then it tilted its head at an unnatural angle, its eyes wide and hollow, staring directly into the car. And then, in a voice that seemed to echo in their heads, the figure spoke. "Come out, come see." It was a voice, deep, guttural, and wrong in every possible way. The words weren't spoken aloud, but somehow they were inside Michael's head. He felt a sudden urge to get out of the car, as if some force was compelling him to do so. No, we can't," Michael stammered, his hands shaking. "We have to stay inside." Jake was already reaching for the door handle, as though the voice had taken control of him. "No," Michael shouted, grabbing Jake's arm, pulling him back. But it was too late. The moment Jake opened the door, the figure lunged. It wasn't human. It was something else, something twisted, its face distorted into a grotesque mask of hunger. Michael screamed, but it was too late. The thing dragged Jake out of the car, its hands cold and slick like ice, pulling him into the dark woods, vanishing with him into the night. Michael and Ben didn't wait for the thing to return. They ran, sprinting down the road, desperate to escape, their breaths ragged and filled with terror. Behind them, the woods were still, unnervingly silent, as if nothing had ever happened. They reached the nearest town, finally finding help. But when they went back to search for Jake, the woods were empty. No sign of the car, no sign of Jake, not even a trace of the thing that had taken him. Just the empty road, stretching on forever into the night. And every so often, if you're brave enough to walk that stretch of road, you might hear a voice, a soft whisper carried on the wind. "Come see."